Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm glad you all could make it tonight to this, or today, wherever you may be at, to Girls Night In Online. I'm Destini. Well, thank you for your patience. I'll go ahead and start my screen share for you. And hopefully, I say it's as easy as ABC. I hope that you all agree as well, but this presentation is going to give you a basics on behavior analysis, a little bit of the history, and really looking at how we can make behavioral changes for better health, whether it's our own health, your health, or really looking at anything kind of you would like to see changes in. A little bit of background on myself. I have 20 years experience in the field of behavior analysis. You'll see down there by my name that I have the letters BCBA. That's because I'm a certified behavior analyst, board certified behavior analyst since 2005, and a licensed behavior analyst. I actually am in California where we don't have licensure, but I am licensed in Arizona and Utah. So different states have different mandates, but if you're looking for someone to give you assistance in the area of behavior analysis, you do want to try to make sure that they have those BCBA initials. I've been working in the field so long, I've been able to work with a variety of populations, including individuals as well as groups. And a lot of the time I've spent working with people with developmental disabilities, mental health issues, and organizations. But I primarily like to use behavior analysis with myself in the realm of health and wellness. I'm very big into fitness and I try my best to eat healthy, but I guess the biggest proponent I'm gonna say today is that it's really all a balance, right? And how can we make it balanced for ourselves? It's very individual for us, but hopefully this gives you some background and assistance on how you can do that. Now, what is behavior analysis? So, some of the background is talking about what people think a behavior analyst does and what we actually do. So a lot of times when you hear, or at least when I've said, I'm a behavior analyst, I immediately get folks asking me if I'm going to psychoanalyze them, the whole lying on the couch kind of psychologist theory. I've also been thought of as a teacher in a sense. There is some teaching involved. And a lot of people know behavior analysis by the term ABA because that's applied behavior analysis. And if people have heard of ABA, they often think of it as the treatment for autism. Now, I would like to say it's a very good treatment methodology for those with autism spectrum disorder, but that's not all it is. It's really had a long existence in the field, from experimental, where we get all our research from, to applied. And yes, again, it works in treating people with the ASD disorder, but also it could be seen in the fields of gerontology, addiction, behavioral medicine. Like for instance, addiction, you see it used in alcoholism and gambling addictions a lot. And also in large-scale organizations for what's called systems analysis. So not just on an individual level, but we can actually use what we've learned to look at an organization and see what behavior in organizations need to change, whether it's productivity, whether it's safety in organizations. You see behavior analysis used a lot. So we do very many things, but we all use the same basic principles. And to tell you where those principles came from, I made a fun little slide of the history of behavior analysis. A lot of people know of Pavlov and his dog experiment where the dog salivated at the ringing of a bell. So this is kind of where it initially started. And what's interesting is Pavlov was a physiologist, had really nothing to do with psychology, but he ran this experiment and found that initially food would make a dog salivate, but that he could train the dog to salivate to the ring of a bell. So he was getting these, what we call contingencies, and seeing them happen. And then as things started to progress in time, Watson actually brought in the theory that it's less about the mind per se and more about behavior. Unfortunately, the experiment he did on that little baby wasn't very ethical because it really involved some fear, but it really brought information into more of what we do versus everything that we think. And then Thorndike was really cool because he did an experiment with cats where he actually taught a cat to get out of a box by pressing a lever, and then they would be rewarded for that. So he introduced the law of effect, which later a lot of people know, B.F. Skinner. It's really about looking at those causes and effects. And Skinner expanded that idea into what's called operant conditioning. And really generally, it's kind of taking into account nature and nurture. So it's really about what in our environment is happening that leads to us having a behavior, and then what makes us keep doing those things or not doing those things. And that came from, you'll see his pigeon experiments. He did a lot of experiments with pigeons, but that's the experimental side. And then down the line, we have taken those and learned how to apply them to those different organizations. So those are I think, are some of the really key things in history to know about behavior analysis, where it went from kind of physiology to the mind to actual behavior. And you'll see on this slide that the focus of today is really to learn about your own and other people's behavior. And to do that, we focus on the ABCs. Now, we always really want to try to improve what we call socially significant behavior. And that's really individualized to each person. It's what matters to you. In the fields, though, of developmental disabilities, for instance, we look a lot at language and communication. In organizations, significant behaviors include what I mentioned before, making sure staff are safe, let's say in an industrial situation. So we're really looking at things that make a difference significantly in the lives of individuals and organizations. But those ABCs. So this is the fun part. You'll see in behavior analysis, psychology, you'll hear me talk a little bit about mindfulness later. I think we're all saying the same thing often, but we use different words sometimes, so it can get very confusing. So hopefully to break it down for you more easily, I just described what the ABCs are: antecedent, behavior, consequence. But antecedent just means what happens before. Behavior is the actual thing you want to look at trying to change. And consequence is what happens afterward. So the ABCs of behavior. I think it's important, though, when we're thinking about behavior change, and when we think about what happens before, those antecedents, we have to think about the things in general that happen to us, and then what also actually specifically triggers us to do something. So what happens generally before is called a setting event. What happens to make us have a behavior typically is called a trigger. And then the consequences involved could include things personally that happen after the behavior to you and your thoughts and your feelings, but also what are others in your environment doing? So it's not just the consequence of yourself, it's the consequence of others. And it's really important to start, though, with the behavior. What is that one thing you're looking at changing? And then we'll go through some examples in a little while, but I just want to make sure kind of everyone has that basic understanding of those ABCs, because it is what we call a contingency, and everyone needs to understand that it all starts with the behavior. And then we figure out the before and we can figure out the before and after anytime, but it's about defining what that behavior is. And let me give you one example of a definition of a behavior, because it's really interesting how people can define behavior so differently. I worked with many, many families over the years, and often with children, a lot of families wanted to address tantrum behavior. And I have an understanding of what I think a tantrum is, and you guys probably do as well. For these two families, it was very different. One mother described her child's tantrum behavior as them screaming at the top of their lungs, crying, dropping to the ground, kind of that kicking and screaming kind of thing. And another parent described their child's tantrum behavior. And when they described it, it was very, very different. It was the child would whine a little bit, scrunch up their face, and put their head down, just kind of like stomp. Now, if you ask that first mom, if that second child was having a tantrum, she'd say no way, because she defined tantrum as something very, very different. So in that example, you just really want to define what behavior you're looking at. Because even if you're asking for other people's help, let's say your behavior is, I want to work out more. To you, working out more would be working out maybe one more day a week. But to your friend, working out more might be working out 5 more days a week. And you don't want somebody like getting on your case that you're not working out 5 days a week when you consider one more day good enough for you. So again, it's really all about making sure those definitions and expectations are really clear. Why do we behave the way we behave? A lot of people think and can say it's from a million different things, but really there are only 4 functions to behavior. It's kind of crazy if you're like, but wait, I do things for different reasons all the time. If you break it all down to its very, very basic steps, there really are only these 4 functions. And the first is self-stimulatory. It's the one that's a little bit different from the others. And that's because it's an internal function of behavior. It's kind of a sensory function. For instance, I see this a lot with younger females playing with their hair, if you could still see me. And so typically you're not getting anything from that other than it feels good to you. So that's what self-stimulatory means when it's a function. It's something internally is good to you about it. Now the other 3 all have external variables. So they are escape, meaning you're avoiding something. You're getting out of some situation, whether it's you're trying to escape doing the dishes, or maybe you're trying to avoid a difficult conversation. It's just trying to get away from something. The third function is attention, and attention can be both positive or negative. You might do something that gets you praise, but people also might do something that gets them reprimands, and they actually like getting that reprimand, that negative attention. So we really have to look at that closely. And then the last function of a behavior is the tangible activities. So that means you're actually physically getting something out of it or engaging in some sort of activity. And the easy, as you'll see, way to remember these 4 functions of behavior is self-stimulatory, escape, attention, tangible, with the acronym SEAT. And if you just start to think about it right now, kind of think of something that's happened to you recently, something you've done or your child has done or your partner has done, and kind of think about, what was that reason they did it? What did they get out of it? And see if you can actually pick one of these 4 behaviors. And if you boil it down, you probably can pick one. Now, occasionally things serve more than one function. You might be able to escape a situation, plus you get some tangible that somebody's going to give you. I don't want to do my homework. Oh, well, you have to, but I don't really want to. So then grandma comes over and, oh, grandma's here, go see grandma, and grandma brings candy. So kind of that whining about, I don't want to do my homework, they got to escape it, and they might have also gotten candy because it just, that happened to be those consequences. So things can have more than one function, but they're still all going to be related to these 4 things. Now, how do we actually use ABA today? So what I didn't mention before is that typically behavior analysis really strictly focuses on what we call overt behavior. That means behavior that we can actually see happening. So that behavior is that tantrum I mentioned. You can see and you can actually know exactly what that behavior looks like. It could be verbalizations. I'm talking, I said the word talk. That's an actual behavior that you can actually hear, see. So that's typically how we've used behavior analysis in the field when we're looking at making changes with individuals, groups, and organizations. However, being a branch of psychology, it's taken us a while to kind of incorporate the other parts of psychology into behavior analysis, such as cognitive behavioral therapy. And you'll see that things like, I didn't put it on here, but RFT, relational frame theory, and acceptance and commitment theory, ACT, are all coming from psychology as well. But they've began to sort of look at the difference between just feelings and thoughts and emotions. And for instance, ACT has begun to look at it in a little bit more of a behavioral fashion. So it allows us as behavior analysts to incorporate that into our practice. And then I even wrote down mindfulness, because really, again, I think a lot of what we're doing we're using different words for. So mindfulness, you'll hear a lot about. The meaning of mindfulness is basically being in the present state, in the present state of your thoughts, feelings, and emotions. As a behavior analyst, if I was just looking at your overt behavior, I couldn't really help you change your own thoughts, emotion, and feelings because I can't hear and see them. So I don't know when they're happening. So things like that really take a lot of self-management, meaning you have to be able to write down or accurately state your thoughts and feelings. And we know it's kind of hard sometimes to remember those things that we might have thought in the morning to remember what that was in the evening. So when we want to change our own behavior, if that behavior includes things you think or feel, you want to get really good at starting to write those things down, because if we're going to use this technology that we're learning today to apply it to our health and wellness, we have to get really, really good about documentation. Because, you know, for the life of us, I can say, I'll remember this, I'll do that, I'm going to get better. But one of the best ways to remember to do something is to kind of make it a habit, and writing it down or typing it out or putting it as a note in your phone, just having that visual so you can go back and see progress, or sometimes see lack of progress. It's really, really important. And I'm going to share with you a tool that will help you do that. I believe you'll also be able to get it sent to you. I'm hoping. That way you can even print it out and use it for yourself anytime. And here's what that is. That's called a sample ABC data sheet. There's a ton, if you were to Google ABC data sheets, a ton of different data sheets. But I actually made this one because I thought it was a really good way to get in all the information you need in order to kind of learn about yourself and to begin to make those changes. You'll see on the column on the left-hand side, I did not take the time to mention date and time, but it's always really important when you're looking at your own behavior, or if you're looking to help someone else assist in changing their behavior, that you actually look at when it's happening. Because sometimes all it takes is looking at a pattern. Oh, this is always happening in the morning. What can I change about what the morning maybe routine in order to help change that behavior? So this looks like a lot of information on this sheet, but it's basically
Destiny, I think you froze. Hi, everybody. It looks like she froze, and so I think she's going to sign off and come back on. Destiny, you back? Yeah, your microphone's muted. I think you have to unmute.
Sorry about that, everyone.
There we go. Okay, she's back. All right, take two. Go ahead.
All right, let me reshare that with you. We were on the data sheet, correct?
Yes, we lost you on the data sheet.
There we go. All right. There we go. So basically, I was just saying you want to start with writing down what that behavior is and describing it, and then go back to what immediately happened before. What is that trigger event? So it was the behavior is started to have a tantrum, you know, said, no, I don't want to do it. I don't like homework. What happened immediately before was mom said, you have to do your homework now. What happened after was grandma walked in, mom said, okay, go see grandma, and grandma gave some candy. Now, you can look at the setting events as well, because maybe that child was super hungry, maybe they didn't sleep well, because that might play a part in why they said, no, I don't want to do my homework, because maybe they don't normally do that. But when you write it all out, you get a better picture of what actually happened during your time, during that whole event that you might not otherwise have picked up on. And then you can think about, like, well, why did that behavior occur? And like I shared before, in that particular example, I would hypothesize that they didn't do their homework and got out of it because of the escape factor. And then on top of that, they got a tangible of candy. But if you do things enough times, you begin to see what those patterns and functions are. And then to actually work on those functions, you begin to select what should happen instead. So whether it's your child is having a tantrum, or whether it's you got up from the couch and got another serving of ice cream, or you said to yourself, I'm not going to work out today. You can put all of those things in the behavior column and figure out what happened before and after to look at your own patterns of behavior. Then you think about, well, what do I really want for myself instead? I want my child to do their homework when I say do their homework. So you figure out, well, then I can't let them escape that homework even if grandma comes over. And I definitely can't give them candy until their homework is done. If it's, I want to stop myself from getting the second helping of ice cream, well, what happens before and after that? For me, when I snack more, it's usually like a break in the programming I'm watching in TV. It's just I've been time to do something and I'm kind of bored. I feel kind of hungry, but the consequence is typically I usually don't feel good about it. So I am getting something tangible, but kind of it's not making me feel good. So what would make me feel good is to maybe at that break, the behavior I want to see, maybe I pick up a magazine and look at some pictures during that break. And then what I would get out of that as the consequence instead would be probably a sense of happiness. And we could call that a sensory function because that's sort of internalized. So again, you can use this for behavior you want to decrease, but you can also think of the behaviors you want to increase and try to change your environment to help you. I know this is a lot of information, so I'm going to leave and go to the questions and see if there are any questions there, but leave you with a quote that Skinner said. He said, "A failure is not always a mistake. It may simply be the best one can do under the circumstances. And the real mistake is to stop trying." So it's important to know that a failure is actually a learning tool. And in the essence of this conversation, we can actually look at what allowed us to fail. What was happening in our environment before, what happened in our environment and internally after that sort of allowed that to happen. And we can slowly actually learn to make changes so we don't make as many mistakes. Again, we're always going to make mistakes, and it's not bad to make mistakes. But if we just keep looking at what we're doing and modifying some of what we're doing, little by little, it's funny, I saw this analogy someone posted on a picture. You take off one paper towel and it looks like the roll is the same. But if you look at 2 weeks later, it's vastly different. If you look at it, so it's the same thing with your own behavior. You might not see yourself changing in 1 day, 1 week, but if you compare yourself from today after implementing something like this for behavior change, and then look at yourself in 3 months, you'll see a really big change. I want to be able to get to some questions if there were any, so I'm going to pop open the chat box. I don't see any questions. I know I covered a lot of information, so I just wanted to check in if there were any questions, if you want to type them out. But in generally, can be daunting to think about changing behavior. But if you just actually use that information and start to take that data, to write that down, you'll begin to understand without even remembering all this explanation. You'll begin to see your own patterns. So I think it's just something you really have to take a look at. And we did get a question pop up. I love behavior analysis in different settings. And one of the questions came up about discussing food addiction and specific behavior change. So a lot of times food addiction is very difficult, especially if it's related to a disorder like Prader-Willi, because again, that's a medical issue. If we have any actual medical issues, you always want to address medical first, because that could actually then automatically change your behavior. Just like even if it's a simple thing like a sensitivity of lactose intolerant, you need to know that to change your behavior around it. But related to things that are more addictive in nature, you still want to look at the pattern of behavior. What makes it more likely that a person is going to engage in that addictive behavior? So what in their environment makes it more likely to do so? So is it the people they're around? Is it the availability of food that's around them? A lot of times with food addiction and other addictions, the behavioral strategies include no access to those items, and then a lot of treatment in understanding their thoughts and the pattern of their own behavior when they're encountering those different types of addictive things. Like it could even be, the addiction could be gambling, the addiction could be drugs, or it could even be food. So the behavior change you want to think of in that realm is looking at how to modify the environmental situation when the addictive behavior actually occurs, and then finding ways to decrease the reinforcing value of the food. So if there is a way to do that, that's how you want to address that. And are there any other positive behaviors that can be done instead of the addictive behavior that can give some of the same reinforcement? So is there anything based on the function that could be just as reinforcing as that addictive behavior? I got another question. What if a person calls themselves other than their name or uses a street name? I'm not exactly sure if the behavior is you want them to use their actual name. It's just to find out the reason why they're doing that. What is the function of that behavior? What are they getting out of that? And then figuring out, can they get the same consequence from using their real name? That's an interesting one, actually. That's a really interesting one. And then you also want to think about what behaviors, again, are the most important to change? What's really socially significant to you? And are there other things that are more or less important? And to tackle those things that are more important first. And I really appreciate your time today. Again, a lot of information was shared. I know hopefully when you get sent that data sheet and you just have a chance for yourselves to kind of look at it and start to fill out some information, you'll get a better sense of generally what kind of behavior analysis is and how it could really help you personally. Again, whether it's your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health, as long as you're managing all the information that you're thinking and feeling internally and getting it down physically on that paper to review, you can make some great changes. Thank you so much.